All right. How's it going, everybody? Let's see. Make sure everything's set up here properly. Okay. I literally decided to do this stream last night and realized, shoot, I haven't streamed in years, I think, at this point. And I was like, how do I do this again? I had to get everything all organized and whatnot. Yeah, we're going to have some fun here today. And if we like this, you're going to have to let me know because I might be doing some more stuff like this. I like the idea of live streaming. And I think it'll be a way to get more content out at hopefully and build more of the community aspect around all this kind of stuff. Nice. We got some people in here already. Appreciate the kind words. Who we got? Got Robert in here. Yo, glad to see you're in here, Robert. He's in the Frontline Man community. Nice. Sam, Rahman, Mr. Zerk, Rahman, Dan, Talan, Nomadic, big guy. Nice. Thanks for showing up, friends. So let's go ahead and start getting into this thing. Okay. So I'm coming at you guys today live with, no carefully written script because really I want this raw because, well, really it fits this topic really well because the way that I see it, and it's something I've seen constantly, is that there's two kinds of big problems that we face in life. We face brain problems and we face balls problems. Okay. So what is a brain problem? Well, a brain problem is something where it's you need to use your prefrontal cortex to solve some kind of logical puzzle, right? You got to move the variables around and use your IQ to come up with a solution. But then you've got balls problems. And these are all about really taking risks and making sacrifices, facing discomfort and putting yourself in, what would be considered a vulnerable position. There's some stakes at play. And this, what happens when you're dealing with balls problems, at least is what I call them. It's you're activating the limbic part of your brain, the emotional part of your brain that controls all of your internal neurochemicals and stuff like that. And the reason I just call them balls problems is because in particular, all right, men, our testosterone has a big impact on our limbic system. It has a big impact on our capacity to really withstand risk taking and be aggressive and assertive and all this other kind of stuff. And I think the way that men process this stuff is fundamentally different than the way that women process this kind of stuff. So I don't know if everything here applies to women. I don't know how much of it does, probably some of it. But I really want to be speaking to how I think the average man with a normal hormonal profile needs to be approaching life if he wants to be making big progress. Okay. And the first thing you got to understand is that even when you're dealing with a brain problem, it's always also a balls problem, at least if there is any sort of, consequences or stakes on the line. And the reason for this is because as soon as there's consequences, as soon as basically you're dealing with something that is meaningful to you, right, then you're going to have an emotional reaction to it. And that automatically engages this limbic primal part of our brain, which is connected to, our balls and testosterone and all that kind of stuff. So let me give you an example to break this down. Imagine you're an engineer and you need to solve some technical problem. All right. You got to figure out how to write some kind of computer program or solve some math equation or whatever. Now, on the surface, that might seem like a brain problem. It's all about your prefrontal cortex. But in reality, in order to approach that problem and to stay engaged with it, okay, there's something that has to happen first, which requires you to step up and confront the problem before you know how to solve it. Okay. And this is something that I would say takes balls. All right. And so everything that you're doing that means something to you, it has this component to it, even if it seems like it's a primarily cerebral sort of situation. And what I found, I've been coaching guys for over 10 years now, is that a lot of guys will fall into this trap of trying to solve, their problems in their life by like applying brain power to balls problems. So that's where procrastination, overthinking, and over-optimizing come into play. So like, what does this really mean? Well, it means that when guys like feel themselves running into internal resistance, they immediately start trying to figure out, how can I solve this logically? How can I, tweak this? How can I perfect that? How can I make myself feel more comfortable, etc.? And what that ends up doing is it just causes them to keep spinning around in their prefrontal cortex, but they're ignoring the core issue is that they gotta sack up and take some action. They have to step into that risk-taking mode. Okay. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you know how to harness this more aggressive and primal part of your psychology. Okay. So how do we do this? How can we engage our balls when it comes to solving our problems? So I like to think of things, you kind of think on the primal level here. And I would break this down into like three big things. You got territorialism, aggressiveness, and pain tolerance. And all of these things, they're very, primal. They're very like almost animalistic in a sense. But if you don't know how to work with these forces, you're going to just be stuck in your nerd brain that's basically just going to get bullied by life. All right, you're going to get bullied by life. You're not going to be able to trade your comfort for the things that you really want. So let's go into each of these here. So let's talk about this territorialness. We all are familiar with like the animal kingdom, like, animals fighting for territory, right? And, you look at the primate kingdom, like the gorilla, like the big silverback gorilla, he's got his troop and it's his job to like, that's my troop. That's my monkey. That's, this is my turf, right? And, they use that to basically run their whole world. And we have this inside of us as well. But where do we apply this territoriality to get beneficial results? So one example, probably the most profound example, is to apply this to your sense of identity. And you want to be in a state where you control your identity, i.e. the story about yourself, and no one else does. You don't get to fucking tell me who I am because I say who I am. All right. And how does this play out? Well, if you're like, so for example, me doing this stream, okay, there is resistance, fear, and, I'm going to go into it kind of like, half cocked purposely because it forces me to confront the fear of like, oh, well, what if it doesn't go perfect? What if someone doesn't like this? What if someone thinks I'm stupid or I make a big flub and I screw something up, right? All of that is really, it's fear about someone seeing you and telling a story about you, saying like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, or, oh, this guy isn't good enough, right? And when you're not territorial about your own sense of identity, then other people can come in and they can tell a story about you. And the weak-minded guy, the guy who's not connected to his balls, he'll internalize that. He'll let someone else's opinion control him. Right? And they'll be terrified of that. And this is where like all the kind of people-pleasing behavior comes in, where people like they'll act fake, they'll act inauthentic, they'll hold themselves back because they don't want someone else to basically tell a story about them that they don't like, right? And at the end of the day, though, this is all because they have ceded territorial control of their identity to someone else. All right? And so if you want to be able to break free from that, you've got to take control of it. And this really cuts through so much of the resistance that guys run into. This is one of those things where guys will just put off their dreams for forever because they're afraid of what someone else will think about them. So you got to cut that out. And the way you do it is you don't do it through any sort of magical rationalization. You can have all the rationalizations. You can know other people's opinions don't matter or whatever. But until you feel it down in your nuts, it's not going to mean anything. And that's a big one. So next point about this territoriality thing is that you can apply it to your habits. You can apply it to your discipline. And in particular, like it's about who controls the way that you live your life, or what controls the way that you live your life. So, you can look at a bad habit like this. Say, for example, say you're hooked on porn. That's something I deal with a lot with guys. Guys, basically, they get into this scenario where porn kind of is their master. There's this thing that's taking control of them. And you got to be willing to say, no, screw you. You get out of here. And it might sound like silly to personify porn as like this invading force in your life. But if you do that, well, that lets you engage this like ancient, primal, and insanely powerful circuitry of territoriality. Like, I get to control my actions. You don't get to control my actions. Speaking specifically to whatever that bad habit is that is maybe holding your life, holding you hostage, and preventing you from being the person that you want to be. So get angry at this thing and decide that I'm going to take back control. And then from there, it's like, all right, let's bring it down to an even more practical level, is deciding to take control, take command of your first piece of territory, right? So you got to decide, what's my beachhead into this? How am I going to engage my path of conquest here? So, for example, with this stuff here, in the realm of the rugged productivity series, in the last video of the series, I was talking about how you need to have an iterative mindset where you got to take that first step. And so that's really what you're deciding, is you're like, what's the first piece of territory that I'm going to take? And so for me, one of the things I've been playing around with a lot is like, how can I put more content out here? How can I do X, Y, Z? And I was like, all right, you know what? I've had this idea about doing some more live streaming stuff and then breaking it down to videos, etc. And this is a perfect example to do it ruggedly. My first thing I'm going to take control of is getting a frickin' live stream just up. So I planned it out last night and boom, here I am. I decided to be territorial about saying, this is going to be the first thing I take. And that's it. And I make it simple, right? And we'll talk more about this a little bit later, but that's that. So, all right. We talked about territoriality. Now I want to talk about aggressiveness. This is another piece of using your balls. And this has to really do about speed. It has to do with how rapidly are you able to take the directionally correct action. And you can kind of put it into a extreme scenario to paint the picture here. Imagine you're getting jumped in a street fight. All right, you don't want to just sit there frozen in your brain, your prefrontal cortex, and your rational thinking, because if you do that, that part's just going to start spinning and spinning and spinning, and you're going to freeze. Right? And if you tried to actually think through clearly in that moment, well, you're probably going to be thinking oh shoot, how can I talk this guy out of it? Or how can I get a hold of the cops? How did that one self-defense move I watched on YouTube go again? Or whatever. And if you do that, you're just going to get hit over the head and get your shit taken. Okay, so that's just not going to work. The only way that you're going to survive in a situation like that is if you get primal, if you allow yourself to react aggressively. It's just like jam your thumb in the dude's eye, kick him in the nuts, and get the hell out of there, right? This is the kind of attitude. And I use that extreme example, and you might be thinking, oh, well, life isn't a street fight. But getting started with a goal that's got a bunch of emotional resistance around it, it kind of is. It's just an internal street fight. It's an internal turf war about what's going to be calling the shots in your life. Okay. And the key when you're being aggressive is you still want to go for the vitals, and you still want to go as aggressively and as quickly as possible. And so you do this by picking the first directionally useful action you can do as fast as possible. So like I said, with the stream, for me, it's just get one up. Don't worry about all the other stuff. Don't worry about multi-streaming. Don't worry about fancy production. Don't worry about making sure all the announcements are great and all this other kind of shit. Okay. It's just just do the damn thing. And if you do the damn thing once, well, then you can do it more and you can polish it up as you go. If you are maybe wanting to get in shape or something like that. Okay. Well, what's the first frickin' thing you can do? Go for a damn walk, do some push-ups. That's it. You don't need a fancy exercise program. You don't need the full macro setup. You don't need to do this massive meal prep. Just start something. All right. Just get going and as long as it's directionally useful and it builds a platform that can grow into something better, that's the key. And be aggressive about this. So many guys just pussyfoot around this shit so much, and then they never actually get anything done. So aggressiveness is key. And now I want to talk about the next piece, which is pain tolerance. And if you guys, if you're a naturally high T guy or just normal guy in many cases, like you can think back to like when you were in like your teenage years. I don't know about you, but like teenage boys do crazy shit. Like, I wasn't necessarily the best teenager. But frankly, me and my friend group, in some ways, we actually became safer after we started drinking and doing drugs, which I don't actually recommend. But prior to that, it was like all high risk, crazy behavior, like stuff where, you would get, destroy property, or you would be, potentially endangering yourself, like jumping off of cliffs and, smashing stuff and doing that kind of thing, setting things on fire, blowing stuff up with fireworks, all that kind of stuff. And the reason for that is because like guys, like they like this dangerous stuff. There's like, you think about like, the super high T dude, what's he doing? He likes to fight, right? He likes to get in there and like put things on the line. And this high risk, high pain tolerance attitude is important. Now it needs to be trained and it needs to be focused. But if you don't have that, well, then you're going to get hard stuck in your life because, like I said, everything that matters to you is going to require risk and it's going to require pain. And so if you don't have this attitude toward things, then you're just not going to be able to get anything started, right? So get going. Allow it to be uncomfortable. And there's a tip that I can offer you with this is that there's going to be an anxiety that comes up when you consider doing something like this, right? And if you're disconnected from your balls, it's just going to feel scary. It's just going to feel like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to approach that girl. She's going to reject me. Her friends are going to laugh at me. And it's like that kind of thing. And it's like that with pretty much everything. Like, whether it's starting a business, whether it's, building some new thing, like starting some new habit, whatever. And what I want you to do is take that anxiety and tell yourself, I'm not anxious, I'm excited. I'm not anxious, I am excited. And if you lean into that, you'll realize that there is a part of you that is thrilled by the prospect of getting into the arena. And this is one of those things that, like, I think, is it Teddy Roosevelt who wrote this? The Man in the Arena poem? It's a really interesting one, but basically it was like talking about all the critics and the stuff in the crowd, and they can have all the opinions or whatever, but the man who's actually in the arena, actually fighting, he's on a different level. He's playing a different game. And so like when you get in there, you have to realize like, yeah, I might take some hits. I might get beaten. I might screw things up, whatever, but I'm willing to embrace the thrill of this. And if you have that attitude, if you have that spark of being willing to just get out there, put it on the line, then you're going to be able to start living on fire. You're going to be able to start actually engaging. You're going to be able to actually unlock the adventure of your life. But without this, you're not. Okay. So let me walk you through how I tried to apply these principles literally just for the production of this stream. All right. So like I was saying, I've been thinking a lot about how can I produce more content, all this kind of stuff. And frankly, I was like nerd braining out of control. I was just like constantly just being like, how can I make everything so polished? How can I get this, extremely smooth workflow? How can I, do XYZ million things, right? And so what I did is I applied like the principles that I teach in the Frontline Man community to break this down, right? And so a lot of times what you got to do is you got to start shaving away all the nerd brain stuff. Get it all out first. Figure out exactly what your little prefrontal cortex is all nervous and, aspiring to, and then shave it away. Get down to the essentials, get down to the balls of it, and you're going to be able to start doing stuff. So for example here, let me bring this up. So let me see if I can scroll. Can I make this bigger? So this is just like some notes that I did yesterday. So big strategy, begin with the end in mind. Okay. If you want to be able to like do some cool stuff, well, then you got to start with that end outcome. And so I start with the first frontline question. What do I want? It's like, all right, I want them to create more content. I want it to be more compelling and entertaining, right? I want to help guys transform their lives. I want to figure out a way that I can crack into the zeitgeist and really get my stuff out to people. And so it's like, how can I win? All right, well, I can do a live stream. First content, on a live stream first content production strategy. I can try it. I don't know if it's going to work, but let's get something going. And then who will I be? Frontline streamer. That's what I called myself, right? Like to be this third question here. It's all about tapping into the identity of the man that you want to be. And so, it's like, okay, who is this guy? Well, I imagined who this guy is, the guy who does this sort of thing. And I started to talk to him and be like, well, what advice would this guy give me? Well, he would make sure to know what your end goal is and is not, right? I want to make fuel for the frontline man movement. I want to make guys want to click on and consume legitimate self-improvement content over stuff that just wastes their time. I want masculine improvement to be fun and interesting. And then the other point of advice that I got from this version of myself that I imagined, he said, focus on the power that live streaming offers over other content production methods. And so it's like interaction, more natural delivery, conversations with the audience, host conversations, talk about more timely viral topics, etc. And so like this was like the first big crack at it. And then, I go further with it. How can I, so what do I want now that I've talked about all this? Well, I want a strategy for doing this. How can I win? Start the V1 goal, work backwards. And then, same thing. So it's like, talking here, I break it down further. How do I get the MVP? And then so I just got to list out all the stuff that my little nerd brain was freaking out over. Like, what are all the things that I felt like I needed to have to be perfect and safe? And so it's like, all these different stream features, different segment types, content repurposing, production stuff, marketing things, all that kind of stuff. And so I looked at all this, and then I basically channeled into my more primal self and just kicked all this stuff down and said, what do I need to get started? Just do a live stream and then cut the usable segments and repurpose them in the shorter videos. Don't worry about technical polish or really anything else other than that. So that's what we're doing here, right? And you can apply this to pretty much anything you want to do in life. And if you want to learn more about those 3 questions that I used there, that's the heart of the Frontline Man framework, where we teach you just a method of utilizing these questions to create pattern interrupts. Because many of us, we just have very dysfunctional thought patterns that get in our way. And you need something that can cut through them. And nothing does that better than a question, because a question creates an open space in your mind, and that allows new stuff to come in. So I use these 3 questions as the foundation of everything. And, if you want to learn more about that, click the link in the description. So that's the big thing that I wanted you to share with you guys in this first video. But I got some other stuff planned too. I'd love to take questions from you guys in the chat if you've got any thoughts about, how would I apply this to some specific thing in your life. So feel free to put them in the chat. And then I'm also going to watch through and react to popular content out there for dealing with procrastination, because, it's interesting to see what other people say and what they miss. And so we'll be doing a little bit of that. Sam in here says, so how do we reconnect to our nuts if we've been stuck in our head for a long time? That's a good question. The big thing, the most important thing is to come back to, this first question that I was talking about here, the what do I want question. And it's purposeful that it's what do I want, not what should I do. What should I do? That is very much a, prefrontal cortex kind of thing. And the problem with that is that it's not plugged in to your emotional circuitry. It's not plugged into your limbic system. And so if you want to start accessing your emotional power, this nut-driven power, okay, you need to connect to your real desires. And you need to be brave enough to feel the intensity of those desires, right? You got to be willing to be like, what the hell do I really truly want in life? What would set me on fire? What would, fill me with vigor to go after things? And that's like the core of the answer. But then there's like this other layer of issue that guys run into where they've repressed this stuff for so long that they're kind of disconnected from it. And particularly this happens when you've utilized a lot of different kinds of escapism over your life. So, for example, like if you've used a lot of porn, like every single time you've got some sort of unmet desire in your life, whether you're, bored, you're lonely, you don't have enough purpose, you don't have the career you want, etc. If every time you felt one of those uncomfortable emotions, you use porn, or maybe you just ate, binged on junk food, or you just scrolled the internet, or, you distracted yourself with lower level work instead of the higher level stuff. If you just always did that, then you might actually just not even be aware that these deeper desires exist. And you might think that all I have is like a desire for comfort. And you don't. And the way that you can kind of start accessing this sort of stuff is by cutting off the bullshit, right? So, stop the scrolling. Next time you feel that incredible urge to scroll or to look at Instagram thoughts or whatever, don't do it. Don't do it at all. And then sit in that discomfort and then go deeper with it. Be like, okay, at the surface level, that discomfort is, I just want to get my easy hit of pleasure. But if I go deeper in that, I ask that part of myself that's aching here, that's hurting here, what do you really want? What do you really want in this situation? Something's going to pop up most likely. And it can take a few rounds of doing this and self-exploration to get a bead on the actual thing, but you're going to find something. You're going to be like, oh, you know what? Actually, I hate my career. I want to be doing something better. Or maybe it's like, I want to make a bigger impact. Or maybe it's like, I really want like a girl in my life. I want a family. I want XYZ. Or I just want to get in shape. I want to feel good about myself. You're going to find something down in there. And once you find that thing you actually want, then you can start pursuing it with, much more of this aggression, this balls first approach. But if you don't have that, you're not going to have any starting point for this kind of work. Mr. Zirk says, thank you so much for this. Took your Frontline Man course last year and did great. However, a few months later, I find myself going back to old behaviors. Yeah, man, I hear you, man. So that's why we really focus on the dojo, which is the post cohort, the post program thing where we get guys into the process of going further, going deeper, and being really consistent with this kind of lifestyle of where you're going after what you want most. Because it's hard to do it without some kind of external impetus, because our entire society, it feels like, especially if you're online in any capacity, is just trying to get you to unplug, trying to get you to chill out. And once you fall into that, it's difficult to get out of it without some kind of handhold. So one of the big things we focus on is how can we create these regular touch points for guys to pull themselves out of it. So it's like you need some kind of community, some kind of something that is external in your environment that works for you rather than against you. And we're going to be actually launching here soon a lower tier version of our dojo community, so that guys who maybe can't afford to go all in with us will still be able to have something that they can utilize to start doing this work, and it'll still provide a lot of value in that front. Slavko says, hey, Mark, do you think that regular morning wood and vivid dreams are good signs of healing? If you're quitting porn, probably, yeah. So, yeah, generally. But let's keep it, I want to keep it on the topic here right now. So if anybody's got any other questions about motivation, breaking procrastination, etc., put them in. And then what I figured we could do now is we could just take a look at what other people are saying about this problem. But before we do that, I want to look at this one famous clip, because in some ways it sort of encapsulates some of the energy that I'm talking about here. And it's not like the ideal example, but it's so primal and raw, and you probably have all seen it before, that it makes the point. So let's do this here.
Sure. There's no words there. To play us out. What does that mean, to play us out?
Sting is going to do, it's a video, Sting video.
So he's doing a like teleprompter right now news show, and like there's issues with the teleprompter.
What is
For credits.
I don't know what that means, to play us out. What does that mean? To end the show?
Yeah.
All right, go.
In 5, 4, 3.
That's tomorrow, and that is it.
Okay. In 5, 4, 3.
That's tomorrow, and that is it for us today. And we will leave you with a... I can't do it.
Okay.
We'll do it live.
Okay. No.
We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it, and we'll do it live.
Right.
Fucking thing sucks.
In 5, 4, 3.
So that's, oh wait, here. We got to see him just snap back into it.
That's tomorrow, and that is it for us today. I'm Bill O'Reilly.
I love
Thanks
that.
again for watching. We'll leave you with...
I love that, just like you can see him flipping on the switch of professional news anchor and flipping off of it. But what I really like about that clip is that it shows this guy trying to like operate within this like technical framework of like, here's how the studio performance is supposed to go. But then, you know, he's getting fed up, and eventually you see the primal part of him, the emotional part of him start like coming out, and he's just like, screw it, forget all this nerd shit, I'm just going to do it live. And he does. And that's really kind of like what it's got to be like sometimes when you've just been putting stuff off, you've just been holding yourself back. You kind of like almost need to get a little pissed at first. And in general, I don't recommend operating from a place of anger or whatever, but like in terms of like energy levels, like victimhood is the lowest one, where you're just like, oh, this stuff's too hard, I can't do it, blah, blah, blah. And you're never going to be able to take action from there. And so like the next step up, still kind of, you know, generally lower level of consciousness, whatever, but it's still a step up, is to get angry and decide to start pushing back. And if you can't make that transition, then you're never going to be able to operate at those like higher and smoother levels of, consciousness, if you want to call it that. Robert says, I'm probably going to end up using this for public speaking. I know that once I get started, it'll get a lot easier, but getting started is a bitch. I have several blocks. Yeah, man, just get up there. Like your goal should be something like just go do it, right? Do it good or bad. Like give yourself permission to crash and burn. And that's the win. As long as you set the goal properly, then you can win, right? And so one of the big things we focus on is self-affirmation. Like you get to decide the narrative about yourself. And because of that, you get to decide what's a win and what's a loss. So, for example, if I did this stream and it just ended up crashing and burning, technical difficulties, no one showed up, whatever, I would still count that as a win because that was all I was aiming for on this one. And in the same way, like for you with the public speaking, it should just be go do something. Just make it happen. Fall on your face. Sometimes guys, like they get so in their head about stuff that you almost need to make that the first step. Like, for example, I've worked with guys who were, struggling to approach women, talk to girls. Like that's a very common problem. And for guys like this, one of the first things sometimes they need to do is like go get rejected. And that needs to be the goal, right? They need to actually just get comfortable entering into the dialogue and getting rejected. And once they do that enough, then they can start playing at a higher level where it's like, all right, I'm going to try and at least get a number or something like that. And then, you can go on from there. But the big thing is making sure the target is right and controlling that. Sam says, can you give us an in-the-moment energy practice for snapping out of fear, self-doubt, and overthinking when we get stuck in it? It's a good question. Big thing, like I was saying, come back to that first point of like, well, what do I want? Okay, well, I want to like define the thing you want. And then just how can I win would be, what's the first big move that you can make toward that thing? And then just get angry, I guess, like get pissed that this little nerd part of your brain is screwing you over. And so much of this is just letting go. And if you haven't seen my video on dignity that I posted recently, it wasn't the last one, it was the one before that one. in it, I talk about this concept of dignity, and dignity is really actually incredibly useful for this kind of work because it allows you to protect your core, your core sense of self. If you have a dignified sense of your self-worth, meaning that like, no matter what happens, I'm still good. If you've got that, then you're free to make mistakes. You're free to, have things go less than perfect. And that's what like that dignity stuff, it's the center of all my work because everything good flows from that. So if you want to move into a, like a, not even just effective, but joyful mode of rugged evolution in your life, then you've got to have dignity. You have to have this sense of self that transcends the, your results, really, because if we let those results define us, well, then, we're never going to do something that could potentially go wrong. So if you know you're good regardless, well, then you're free to make mistakes. It doesn't matter. Jesus says, is it possible to activate that aggressive part in a conscious way, like thinking into feeling, or would be feeling into action? That aggressive part, yeah. I mean, like that's what I was trying to explain earlier. Is like get territorial, get aggressive, be willing to engage in pain. And so it's like sometimes this is something that it's a switch that almost needs to be felt. Like you as a man, I think it's very important to know how to step into this primal stuff. And some things that can really help guys with this is like lifting weights, doing a martial art. Those are things where you're actually gonna be able to experience it, like really like learn how to control this switch. In a lot of ways, like you'll see people who are extremely aggressive, for example, and then they will go into martial arts and then they'll learn how to actually control that aggression. Like, say they're like a troubled teen or whatever, and they're getting into fights all the time. They go to martial arts and they learn how to stop doing that. But it can also work in the reverse way. There'll be people who are very tepid and timid and all this kind of stuff, and they'll learn how to not be like that. So really, it's like you got to put yourself in a situation where you can learn how to control and gain mastery over this switch. And it's something that you can't explain it in pure nerd brain formulaic terms, because it's kind of like riding a bike. You can have a 1,000-page manual on how to ride a bike, but until you actually get on a bike and learn that internal coordination, nothing's going to stick for you. I don't know how to pronounce your name, but you say, what if I have interactions with CEO level people who are 5 to 10 years younger than me and have more healthy hormones, and thus their behavior is more dominated by them and they are less able to rationalize? I don't know. I mean, like that's one of those things where it's like, that sounds like already written like an excuse in a lot of ways. If they're less able to rationalize, then you got to speak more their language. You got to speak more primally, right? Like if they only respond to status and power, then you got to learn how to play that game, and you've got to play that game, or you got to do a different job, or you got to be happy with not getting the results you want. Learn a way to be okay with that. But like the reality is sometimes you just got to play the game. So for example, on YouTube and content creation, it's like I've had periods where it's like, I'm never going to do clickbait, or I'm never going to do stuff that like appeals to people's lower emotions and that sort of thing. And the problem with that is that you're pretty much deciding to lose the game of virality. You're going to be giving up massive amounts of reach. And so one of the things that I've had to navigate as a creator is like, how do I walk that line, right? Like, I've had things in the past where I went, too over the top, too into the clickbait, too into the culture war stuff. And frankly, it wasn't really what I was interested in, and I kind of drifted. And so the game that I'm playing now is like, how can I play this primal game of clickbait culture that we live in while staying true to my ultimate morals and values? And if you do this right, it's actually an act of service. So for example, if I do this in an authentic way, well, then I could reach that guy who's in his like primal clicking mentality, and he sees something, he watches it, but then I move it into a deeper, more real level. Well, then boom, I've actually played that primal level game in a way that really serves him, rather than just like sitting on that surface point. And so for like, if you're dealing with people in this business environment who are, less rational and whatever, then get emotional with them. Learn how to play the emotional game and do it in a way so that you can steer them toward rationality. And this is something that, if you've got a kid, you've got to do this all the time, because little kids, sometimes their logical faculties aren't fully developed. And if you just explain something rationally to them, it's not going to matter. And so you've got to put some emotional stakes in there. You got to learn how to work with their emotions and to ultimately get them to take that rational sort of action. So, good question. So let's look at some other videos here. See what everyone else is saying. The only way to stop procrastinating by Mel Robbins. All right, 3.8 million views. Let's see what she's got to say.
You're not a procrastinator. You have a habit of procrastinating. Big difference. Because if it's a habit, I can teach you to use science to break it.
There we go. All right. Red flag's already up here. She's going to try and nerd brain this. Let's see. Let me see what I think.
Procrastination. So let's talk a little bit about procrastination. Who in here struggles with procrastination? Yeah, and the rest of you that aren't raising your hand are just procrastinating on doing it, aren't you? I know. You see, I always thought procrastination had to do with the thing I was procrastinating around, right? Like that procrastination has something to do with work. Believe it or not, procrastination has nothing to do with your work. Procrastination is a form of stress relief. Let me explain this. So let's say that you've got some stuff going on in your life, and heck, who doesn't have stuff going on in your life? Maybe you're fighting with your significant other. Maybe mom's or dad's health is failing and it's really, really upsetting you. Maybe you've got some financial stuff. You put too much of your savings into Bitcoin, and now that that's crashed, you're stressed out about it, right? And so you go...
That's hilariously dated.
into work, and when you get into work, you got stuff to do, you kind of walk in and you got this big stress ball that subconsciously is hanging over your head. And so you walk in and you sit down and you got 13 phone calls you need to make. And you also know that you've been chickening out, you've been making easy calls, and there's a bunch of CIOs or other people that are higher level that you haven't been calling. And so as you sit down to do it, and you got the stress on your shoulders, your brain starts to go, wait a minute, well, you want me to make a call to somebody that I'm scared to make? Absolutely not. I'm so stressed out about, can we just watch some cat videos for a minute? And next thing you know, an hour's gone by. And then, of course, what do? You beat
Okay, yep, totally accurate so far.
Yourself up. So the only way that you can break this habit, and that's an important word for you to hear, you're not a procrastinator. You have a habit of procrastinating. Big difference.
I don't think that's actually true. I think that even people who don't traditionally procrastinate can still have instances where they do procrastinate. So I don't know if that's a fair assessment, but it seems like she's going somewhere with that.
Because if it's a habit, I can teach you to use science to break it. You see, all habits have three parts. There's a trigger, and in the case of procrastination, the trigger is always stress. Then there's a pattern you repeat, and in the case of procrastination, it is to avoid doing something. And then there's a reward. You get a little stress relief. The only way to break a habit, you guys, is not to deal with the triggers. You're never going to get rid of the stress in your life. But you can 100% change your pattern of avoiding work. So next time that you're in a situation where you feel yourself hesitate, you spent way too much time checking out the highlights from last night's scores, what you're going to do is you're going to go, oh, I must be stressed out about something. Acknowledge the stress. Then go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I want you to count to yourself because I want you to interrupt the habit that's stored here, and I want you to awaken your prefrontal cortex. Then I want you to just work, just for 5 minutes. The reason why I want you to only work for 5 minutes is because your problem isn't working. It's the habit of avoiding.
All right, hold on. So let's look through those steps here. All right, acknowledge the stress. That's useful. So that's like, to me, the way I would, I think a more useful way, instead of acknowledging the stress, is acknowledge the unmet desire. Because when you just acknowledge the stress of something, that's just you bringing the problem to your mind. But when you acknowledge the unmet desire that is hidden in that stress, well, what ends up happening then is that you then gain access to some kind of power. And then next thing, count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In a lot of ways, this is like, she's saying this is to engage your prefrontal cortex. I would argue that this is not. This is actually a method of turning off your prefrontal cortex. It's learning how to shut up this little chatter thing and just take action. Like shift into really try and shift into a flow state. So I don't think that's quite accurate. But that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 thing can work for sure. and then interrupt the procrastination habit. Let me see.
Your
so
problem
do
isn't
one
working.
thing.
It's the habit of avoiding. I just need you to start. And here's the other cool thing. We know based on research that if we can get you to start, 80% of you are going to keep going.
So not bad for a 3-minute clip. I like it. I don't know if it's going to solve deeper things, but like, because sometimes it's just like, all right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, start. But if you don't know what you're starting on, you don't know what you're fighting for, you know, that kind of thing. It's just like, all right, I work for 5 minutes and then I'm just going to not do it. So, and then eventually it'll even get to the point where you'll just procrastinate on doing her technique, right? So what if you're procrastinating on using her technique? What do you do then? Again, like, I think this requires like deeper level shit. It requires moving into knowing how to access your primal energy to begin with, to equip you to move this kind of stuff. So interesting still. So let's see what we got here. We got, Huberman. Let's see what he's got.
So how can we overcome procrastination? Well, it turns out that there are findings from within the addiction literature that turn out to be very powerful towards leveraging our way out of procrastination. And it has to do with this. You already know, because I've told you probably a dozen times now, that the depth of the trough after a dopamine peak is proportional to how high that peak was and how steep it was, how quickly that peak occurred. It turns out that not only is the depth of the trough proportional to that, but the rate at which you get out of that trough is proportional to how steep that trough is. Let me explain this for you in as clear terms as I possibly can.
That's true.
Imagine you're in an amotivated state. You're just not feeling motivated. You're procrastinating. You may think, okay, the thing to do here is something. I'll clean the house. I'll take care of some bills. I'll do something. Or I'll just wait. Those approaches, as we talked about before, generally don't work, or at least don't work quickly, or they lead you right up to the deadline, and that's the deadline that forces you to get something done, or you just don't get it done and you don't succeed in your goal. That happens a lot as well. However, if you were to take that state of being unmotivated, of procrastinating, and actually do something that's harder than being in that amotivated state, in other words, doing something that's more effortful, even painful, you can rebound yourself out of that dopamine trough much more quickly. So what do I mean you want to put yourself in a state that's worse than or harder than the state that you're in, or do something, quote unquote, more painful? And here I want to be very clear. I'll say this 3 times, but I'm going to say it for the first time now. When I say more painful, I do not mean doing any kind of tissue damaging or psychologically damaging behavior.
He's like, don't beat the shit out of yourself. Don't whip
that's
yourself.
Going to render you injured or not well, even in the short term. That's not what I'm referring to. Okay, let's just get that one out of the way. What I'm referring to is the fact that, for instance, if you're feeling amotivated, but you find yourself cleaning the house as a way to procrastinate, you can say, well, cleaning the house is harder than sitting down and doing nothing. But actually, in that moment or in those moments, that's not the case, or else you wouldn't be doing it. The reality is that the dopamine system works according to what feels hard or easy in the moment. In other words, if you're feeling amotivated, you need to do something and put yourself into a state that's harder than the state you're in. So for instance,
so we're still in the same situation of, okay, that's cool. How do you get yourself to do that harder thing?
If you're sitting around feeling amotivated, or you find yourself tending to tasks that are irrelevant to the goal that you really should be focused on, you need to put your body and mind into a state of discomfort quickly. And the way to do that is to either engage in some tangential activity, meaning an activity not related to your goal that puts your body into a very different state. So here again, I'll default to the obvious one, which is something like cold shower or cold immersion, which not only increases dopamine long term.
Okay, so this was like an idea that was popular back when I was first, getting into this whole scene of discipline and stuff like this. And there was this idea in the NoFap communities where if you wanted to overcome a porn craving, what you needed to do was go do a bunch of push-ups, or you needed to take a shower or a cold shower, something like that. And the problem with this is that, like, all right, you're already dealing with like this desire to escape. You're already dealing with this comfort-based, thing. And I guess, like, at the end of the day, like, yeah, it can work if you can get yourself to do it, but like, you're going to reach points where your energy is low and you're not going to want to do those things. And then you're just going to procrastinate on those things. And guys who rely on that kind of stuff, they always fail when they just reach one of those depleted states where they still want to get stuff done. And so the answer's got to be like, how do I, like, the question that must be addressed is, how do I raise my energy before, like on command. And I think getting in touch with your balls, learning how to be territorial, aggressive, and pain tolerant, like that's kind of the third step, but that's going to come after getting territorial and aggressive. Because without those things, without tapping into that sort of part of your circuitry, you're not going to reach the pain tolerance. All right. And then, you know, if you do that, well, then great. Yeah. Go do 20 push-ups and then get to the thing. It can snap you out of it. But if you don't like tap into that, you know, fiery part of you first, then you're not even gonna be able to use these techniques.
Or over several hours rather, but for most people is experienced as pain. That pain causes a rebound out of that dopamine trough faster than it would occur if you had just stayed in that amotivated state and waited for it to go away, or done something like cleaning up that for whatever reason felt like it required less friction. When I say friction, I mean limbic friction. Your limbic system is always in this dialogue with your forebrain. And limbic friction goes two ways. Limbic friction can be you're tired and you don't want to do something, and so you have to, quote unquote, motivate to do it, energize yourself to do it. Or limbic friction can be that you're nervous and scared and anxious to do something, and you have to calm yourself in order to lean forward into action in order to do that thing despite the anxiety. I realize this can be a little bit confusing as a concept, so I want to go into a bit more detail. Let's imagine that you or somebody else does not like to exercise. You don't want to exercise, and you're trying to get your minimum of 5 days per week exercise, and you're just not motivated to do it. There are a couple different techniques to doing this. Assuming you've taken care of all the baseline stuff, all the foundational stuff we talked about earlier, and you're just not getting in gear, and you find yourself, you know, checking your phone, or maybe you're tending to some tasks, obviously those things are, quote unquote, easier for you, meaning they cause less limbic friction than engaging in exercise. The typical advice would be just exercise for 1 minute, okay? Just get 1 minute of exercise, or 5 minutes, and then use the successful completion of that 1 or 5 minutes as a milestone that allows you to then move to the next milestone. And indeed, that approach can work, and it's exactly what I'm describing here when I say that you're in a state of lack of motivation or procrastination or both, and you need to put yourself into a more painful, not less painful state. So what do? You push up against that friction and you exercise for a short while, and then that pops you out of that trough. That's possible, but for a lot of people, even that won't be possible because they just can't get motivated, or they do that 1 minute or 5 minutes and they're just like, okay, I'm still in the trough. I'm not actually feeling that great. In those circumstances, it makes sense to do something that's tangential to the whole path that you're trying to pursue, this goal that you're trying to pursue. That is, believe it or not, much worse than just being amotivated. And when I say worse, I don't mean picking some task that normally you don't like to do, but now you're willing to do. I mean, literally thinking about what would be worse than being in this state. Again, without causing yourself tissue or psychological damage. What would be worse? Well, cold water would be worse for many people, very cold water. So the key is to figure out something that, for lack of a better way to put it, really sucks. Really sucks.
So yeah, he's just kind of saying the same stuff where it's like, I guess I just wonder if like people like this who hold these ideas have ever actually worked with unmotivated people, because it's not a sustainable thing. It's like, oh, every single time that like you don't want to work out, go do something harder. I'm going to be honest, like the majority of people just aren't going to do that. They're not going to go for it. So, you know, I'm going to give him kind of an on this advice. However, he does make a really interesting point, which is that there's kind of two sorts of problem state you might run into when you interact with your limbic self. And that would be like, sometimes you need to calm down, take action, and then sometimes you need to ramp your energy up to take action. What's cool though, is that when you start using your balls more, what that allows you to do is to do either one of these things. So for example, say, you know, you are nervous about, like you're in an anxiety state. So like you're agitated, it's a high energy state, and you're too nervous to like start something. Like maybe it's public speaking or approaching a girl. Well, if you get territorial, you take control of your identity, you take control of your energy, you say, hey, you know, this situation doesn't control me. Well, then you can use that to gain a sense of comfort and security. You reflect on your dignity, whatever. You use that to gain a sense of comfort and security, which can calm you down, right? But it also works if you're in that lower energy state where you're just feeling sluggish and lethargic and I just don't want to do it. Well, getting a little pissed, particularly at some kind of perceived threat or enemy or controlling force, that can spike your energy up to kick that thing off, you know, to get that foot off your throat, as it were. And so I think that this is something that you can try, learning how to access and press these buttons inside of yourself. So that's enough Huberman right now. Let's do another one. How to stop procrastinating in 27 seconds.
Your friend bets you can't finish your homework before midnight. Here's what you do to prove him wrong. You put your work on your desk as soon as you get home. You make sure your pencil, calculator, and other supplies are all out and ready. You grab some snacks, put time limits on your phone, and play some brown noise to help you focus. You count down from 5 seconds, then leap to your desk and start your work. Every 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, and every 2 hours, you take a 15-minute break. And whenever you get stuck, you ask for help in my Discord server.
So this is a great little reel from a business perspective because, he's got a nice little thing there. It's edited. It's, a topical sort of thing done really quick. And then you get in his Discord server, which hopefully he's using to upsell people and give them useful advice and everything like that. But already the example's flawed, right from the beginning.
Your friend bets you can't finish your homework.
Your friend bets you that you can't finish your homework. That already has an external circumstance with stakes on the line. And really, so there's already an added threat of pain beyond just the not getting the homework done. It's you're also going to lose a bet. And this can be a valid form of motivating yourself. By valid, I guess I mean more it can be an effective form. I think there's also a website out there. It's called Stick, which seeks to take this concept further, STIKK, at least it used to be there. And what it was is you could place bets on anything. It's an accountability service where, you and your friends sign up and it's hey, if I don't do this thing, then I'm going to have to pay you X amount of money. And I hate this form of motivation. And I'm not saying it doesn't work, but the reason I hate it, and you'll understand why if you've watched my recent video on dignity, is because it's fundamentally what I would describe as a backline form of motivation. So, in my whole ethos of masculinity, you got the frontline man and you got the backline man. And the backline man, he really only knows how to run away. And so what he's all about is the way that guy motivates himself is by just installing more fear. Okay, so if he can get himself more afraid of not taking action than taking action, well, then he can basically get himself to run away in the right direction. And frankly, this is a shitty way to live. I don't like operating this way. I don't think anyone likes to live this way, but we all do it from time to time. We let things go to the last moment until we're afraid of something bad happening. And then, only then, can we get ourselves to take action. And so his whole scenario is set up from that perspective to begin with. But his other stuff here isn't bad. So
Before midnight. Here's what you do to prove him wrong. You put your work on your desk as soon as you get home.
So what that does is that reduces the friction of getting started. So a lot of times if you get something like an open loop in your mind, you get something kind of laid out, prepped up, ready to go, it's so much easier to just slide right into it, right? It just reduces this activation resistance. And a simple way that you can apply this every single day is if you plan your day the night before. So if you plan your day the night before, well, you can get up and you can just get to work. There's no sitting in this space of, oh, what do I got to do today? Oh, let me think about this, blah, blah, blah. And because that can slow a lot of guys down. So anytime that you can do preparation for things is really, really useful. Sometimes if I've got something that is particularly demanding in my life that, I've got a lot of resistance around, I'm a little afraid, a little nervous, whatever, I'm, having trouble tapping into my balls, as it were, I'll just make the first big actions. What do I need to do to just get in order to prepare to start, right? So it's okay, I need to have this document up, or I need to have this set of phone calls here, or I need to have an outline of my specific steps. Really kind of what you're doing is you're making it so that you're trying to reduce the time it takes to fall into a flow state. And so this is definitely a useful tactic, I would say.
Make sure your pencil, calculator, and other supplies are all out. Time limits on your phone, and play some brown noise to help you focus.
So just brown noise, that's cool. I like that stuff. I actually, one of my tabs I always have open is brain.fm. And it's a subscription service. It's only a couple bucks a month or something like that. And what you can see 94 weeks of using this in a row. And it just puts on, I guess they're technically binaural beats, but they also have kind of like a white noise effect. Sometimes like I will just use straight white noise, but I've moved to this because I like a little more rhythm in it. But it's basically music designed to help you focus. But even just straight white noise is really powerful. For some reason, it just kind of, you know, drowns everything out and lets you dial in. But that's assuming that you're already ready to get down to work. That's more of like a secondary thing.
You count down from 5 seconds.
So we got the countdown technique again.
Every 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break.
That's Pomodoro technique. For any of you who don't know that, that's great, particularly if you're not used to doing deep work. If you're someone who just is generally kind of ADD, etc. I've used the Pomodoro technique a lot in the past, particularly when I was like coming out of my porn addiction and my brain was just not used to focusing. Like when I first started trying to work for myself, it was so stressful and overwhelming. I could work for like 25, 30 minutes a day. Like I couldn't do shit. And so the way that I actually broke out of that was by doing the Pomodoro technique, basically just trying to hit as many 25-minute chunks of work that I could do per day. Like I would set like a limit, like 5 or 7 or whatever it was, and I would gradually increase it. But what I found is that after you no longer have an issue getting yourself to be productive, it kind of gets in the way, the Pomodoro technique, in my opinion, because it'll actually disrupt deep work. And since a lot of my stuff is deep work, not all of it, but since a lot of it is, I don't need to take a break every 25 minutes. You know, sometimes I want to work for 2, 3, sometimes even 4 hours straight. And if I'm in the flow, why the hell would I like stop myself? If it goes beyond that, of course, you're going to need breaks. And then additionally, one of the things you have to watch out for is like, you got to be disciplined with those 5-minute breaks, because if you don't do that right, then it just becomes, oh, here's my time to scroll. So like in that 5-minute chunk, don't scroll. Don't look at anything. Literally like take a deep breath, close your eyes, like go for a walk, grab a drink, something like that. Because otherwise you're just going to be giving yourself an opportunity to fall into greater distraction. Warrior says here, Pomodoro doesn't work for me. Let's see what you guys have been saying in the chat. Act Podcast says, I can't compete in university, Mark, and I have problem with forcing myself to do my studies and learnings. My primal self is just really messed up. Quitting PMO just clarified my problems and inner pain. Oh, good. That's awesome. I don't know if there's a question in there, but that's a great thing. You know, sometimes like when you've got some kind of dopaminergic sort of issue, especially one that's tied into moral and social stuff like porn is, if you got a problem like that just festering in your life, it just kind of wrecks it from all angles, you know, a brain health angle, a sense of self angle, like all these different things. So yeah, eliminating that kind of stuff can be huge. Sam says, is there a difference between surrender, I mean the good kind of surrender, not giving up, and this attitude of getting productively pissed off? Yes, in the sense that I would say that authentic dominance, like if you say like this guy's, you know, he's dominant, he's assertive. What that really means, if it's healthy, okay, well, let me describe what unhealthy looks like. An unhealthy dominant and assertive means that guy has surrendered to his impulses, right? He's surrendered to his lower emotional like cravings. All right. And that person's, you know, not a great person to be around, one. And two, usually is very, you know, undisciplined and then sometimes even violent or criminal, right? Like that's one of the things we see in people who end up in jail is that they have this low impulse control and they're willing to just, you know, it's like, oh, I saw that guy's watch and I wanted it. So they went over and took it. All right. So that's technically a dominant action, but it's a dysfunctional one. And so if you want to like use surrender properly, in this context we're talking about here, it's about surrendering to your highest conception of goodness. It's about surrendering to what you really want, right? And if you can do that, if you can surrender to that, if you can realize that part is the master, well then from there, then you can get pissed off in your limbic self on behalf of that master, right? And so that surrender to the master internally leads to then dominant action externally. Act Podcast says, how much should I go with the desires of my primal self to stay in balance and be productive in the path? So that's a big answer. Something I go really heavily into my Frontline Man program, if you want some more info on that, click the link in the description. But really what you want to do is ultimately you always want the decider in your life to be your primal self, be your emotional self. You want to live from your heart. We hear people talk about that concept a lot. Living from your heart. What the hell does that mean? Well, really it's like learning how to come from a place of deep want. And the problem is we have to be able to distinguish between deep wants and shallow wants. So a shallow desire might be, I want to eat a bunch of cookies, jerk off, and play video games. But a deeper want is like, well, what's underneath those things? It's like, okay, I want pleasure. I want, sexual connection. I want, in video games, it's like, I want status and conquest. That's pretty much what most video games are. It's like simulating the pursuit of those things. And it's like, okay, well, if I really want those things, how can I get them in a more authentic way? And so the interplay between rational and emotional is ultimately it's like you want your emotional self to be like the Captain Kirk. If you guys are familiar with the old Star Trek, he's like this charismatic, kind of intuitive leader. And he's the one who ultimately calls the shots, but he'd be lost without his first mate, Spock, who's this like, hyper intellectual, rational being. And so ultimately we want to be moving from this place where we're operating from intense emotional desire, like intuitive desire, that kind of thing. But we want those choices to be fully informed. So it's like once the intellect lays out all the real options, just pick the one you want, So it's like in Frontline Man, I teach this concept of resonance. And resonance is creating this click between your intellectual self and your emotional self. And you find that point where they intersect. And it's going to sound right rationally, and then it's going to feel good emotionally. And if you can learn how to find that resonance, then you find your path in life, really. So like we all experience resonance all the time. We just don't know what we're doing. Like anytime you open up your menu in a restaurant, you're going to scan the options, right? You're going to look at all the different things, and then you're going to be running a bunch of logical calculations potentially. Like, how much does it cost? Does this fit my diet? Like, what will this taste like, etc. And so eventually you're going to settle on something that sounds right. It's like, oh yeah, that's within the price range I want to pay. It fits my diet. That's the logical alignment. But then it's like, ooh, that sounds tasty as well. And that's the emotional alignment, and that's resonance. And we want to be able to apply that to everything. And so if you want to be able to find your path forward, you got to find the intersection point of those things. All right. We're not doing porn today, but I'll be doing another stream here probably on the porn stuff here soon. So let's do one more video. Let's see this one. How to stop procrastinating. This one's got more views. Let's see. How to stop procrastinating. Let's do this one.
I don't really like the word procrastination because when we give it this name, procrastination, it makes it seem like this big phenomenon in itself, and it hides the true nature of what it is. When we're procrastinating something, what is it actually saying? We're basically saying, I do not want to do this. Right? Usually something that we should do, but we don't want to do it. So when someone says, how do I stop procrastinating? It makes it seem like there's this kind of like magic spell that you need to break. But actually what you're asking is, how do I do something that I hate doing? And that is a very different question, because instead of asking that, we could be asking something else, like, how do I make it more enjoyable? And that is actually a perfectly valid question, even for something like studying. Most people are just conditioned to study in such a meaningless, bland way that it's really boring. But the human brain loves learning. If you're studying in a way that's truly activating effective learning, it's actually more enjoyable and engaging without you having to force it to become more enjoyable or engaging. So the question we should be asking is, how do we make studying more enjoyable? I don't really like the word procrastination.
I like that take there. And I think he kind of jumps a really important conclusion that's, I think, worth looking at. But the thing I like about what he's talking about here is that like he mentions that there's this difference between kind of like wanting something and then feeling like we should do something. And then he gets into, well, okay, if I'm going to do this thing, how can I make it so that I want to do it? And really he's talking about what I just was getting on about this resonance concept. It's like, how can I make studying a more resonant thing, right? And maybe you can do that through, changing your studying methods, changing your attitude around it. Like there's always internal and external paths, right? Like an external path would be like, I'm going to set myself up in a coffee shop with some smooth jazz playing and, that sort of thing. And then maybe the internal path would be changing your mindset around the studying and that sort of thing. So like, that's really cool. But what he's getting at here is this assumption that studying's the right move. And one of the things that I've helped guys with a lot is recognizing that you should never do something you don't actually want to do. And so many guys, they trap themselves in this terrible life where they're just, all they have is drudgery and obligation. And they don't actually want any part of it. They don't like the job that they're working at. They don't actually want to work there. They don't want to be in the relationship that they're in, etc. Or they do want those things, but they're still pursuing it out of a place of obligation. So an example with this would be, I'll help guys like quit porn and stuff, obviously. And when a guy's trying to cut this stuff out, he'll usually come at it from a place of should. It's like, yeah, well, I should be, faithful to my wife and that sort of thing. And as long as he's doing that, then it's just going to be this prefrontal cortex versus limbic system battle, brain versus balls. And the key is to get the balls on board. And so the only way you can do that is by giving the balls actually the option to choose. You got to give the balls like free rein and trust that they're going to choose the best option if they're properly informed. So an exercise would be like, hey man, you can keep watching porn. You can go get a prostitute. You can divorce your wife who won't sleep with you. Like seriously put those options on the table. And instead, like when a guy does this, every time I've done it actually, he's always been like, you know what? I actually don't want to do any of those things. What I want is to quit porn and fix my relationship with my wife. And when he does this, then instead of pursuing porn from this place of obligation, he's connected to that limbic desire of like, that's actually what I want to be doing. But sometimes, it doesn't go that way. Sometimes you get down into what you really want and you realize, shoot, I actually don't want to level up in this career. I hate this career. And what I really want is to get into this other career. And so at that point, start doing that. Start at least taking the steps. You don't need to fully quit your job in the moment, but you can start exploring those other options. And in fact, in doing that, you're probably going to reduce the resistance you have to working that current job. And so this is like the adventure that frontline living will set you on. It'll force you to confront the truth of your real desires and live that out. ACT podcast says, March, what's your opinion on the ACT psychology? I don't know. I'm not familiar with it. All right, so that's enough of these. Let's see, where are we at? About an hour and 22. I wanted to look at some of the other ideas around procrastination out there. So what I did was I went into Reddit and went into the self-improvement subreddit and just typed in procrastination. So it's like, what are some of the most popular things in here? Let's see what my savage CEO taught me about procrastination. Let's see what a savage CEO did. All right. Once we had a, let me see 1 second here. Okay. Once we had a freaking warrior as a CEO in our company. This dude was a judo black belt and had a handshake the size of a gorilla, okay? One Friday afternoon, we all sat together. I asked him how he managed to make so many high-quality decisions. What he said next blew our minds. You know, Kevin, he started, the world's so vast and fast-paced, our brains can't keep up with the challenges we face every day. Our bodies are simply not built for this. It's our responsibility to update the hardware between our ears with new functions. He went on, this is our God-given gift. We literally have a supercomputer in our heads that we can create new functions without adding hardware. Fun fact, parts of our brain actually grow if we use them often. If you're frequently scared, the size of your amygdala, the fear center, literally increases. Then he hit us with the big one. There's this one skill that's made me get things done 10 times faster than any other manager here. Want to know what it is? Absolutely, Mr. Hauser, I said, intrigued. Learn to make decisions as soon as they have to be made. Do not delay anything. My father used to hammer into my mind, son, if things can be done within a minute, execute immediately. Got a fine for parking? Take out your phone and transfer immediately. Your mother would appreciate surprise flowers after work or school. Take out your phone and make an alarm immediately so you won't forget. Your colleague calls you asking to cover a shift. Check your schedule immediately. If things can't be done immediately or you need to delay strategically, you remember A, B, C priorities, write them down on a to-do list, but not by any means keep them in your head. The risk the risk that you keep delaying decision after decision is too high, and it has another dramatic ripple effect if you do so. He then asked, ever heard of willpower? I nodded insecurely. Willpower is your treasure for making quality decisions throughout the day. Every decision you make demands a toll from this treasure. Big decisions like working out or doing chores often take a hefty toll. The longer the day goes on, the lower the quality of your decisions. You might work out before noon, but by evening, it's a lot less likely, especially when you hit that cozy couch of yours. And rejecting something, that also costs willpower. Most people keep paying tolls for overdue decisions, and it exhausts them. They don't get anything done because they're so poor in willpower. By evening, their willpower treasure is empty. No energy for cooking, working out, or anything meaningful. Barely anything happened except for the war inside their heads. They just end up on a couch letting another day slip by. These lessons I had to learn the hard way. I was on the brink of burnout several times because of the storms in my head keep pushing me towards the abyss. And yeah. So, okay. I like this. And for some reason, I can't share this screen here properly, but I think the biggest thing here that is really useful in this post is the idea that around energy management. So one of the simple things is to just try and get into this flow state. Because when we're in flow, that's when we're going to be doing things as easily as possible with the least resistance. And if you can build this habit of immediate execution on small things, you can get a lot done. And you can do it by just kind of you just stay in rhythm. It's just if you train yourself to you got to do this thing, just boom, knock it out. And what I found is that if you can create times to do this sort of smaller level stuff, you can even go more productively. So he recommends doing it immediately. And in some cases, that's the right way to handle it. But for me in my life, I don't always come across new things that need to get handled immediately. And if I did do that, well, then my whole day would end up getting disrupted. So what I'll do is I'll grab all these little tasks and I'll batch them into one big kind of file in my to-do list. And then I'll dedicate a few hour block to that stuff. And I'll just go boom, 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 boom. I'm just my clearing plate sort of time. And if you approach that stuff with this sort of aggressive balls first mentality, then it's just all right, here, I'm going to be throwing it's if you ever watch Dragon Ball Z where they're doing their little super fast punching and blocking. It's that's that segment, right? And then when you're doing your deep work, that's you charging up the big Kamehameha beam and lasering something down. And just knowing how to create that sort of energetic space inside of yourself and knowing that that's what you're doing can really help a lot with that sort of thing. And the other piece of this message we was talking about is just the time of day, right? If you've got something big you want to do it earlier in the day, almost always. I found that so many guys, particularly if they're trying to get themselves to start a side hustle, all right, and they're already working a full-time job, and they keep trying to do it at the end of their workday, and they just can't do it. The number one change that I'm going to try and get that person to do is to get up earlier. Get up earlier and then do log an hour and a half of work before on your side hustle before you go into your main job. Because if you do that, well, then you're going to be able to do it at a high energy state and you're just going to get it done. Same thing really with working out and stuff like that. If you want to just make sure you always work out, just do it in the first thing in the morning. That's how I've come to do it. It's just it's so much easier. Just get it out of the way. And then boom, you got the rest of your day free then, instead of having this thing that's stressful or obligatory that's hanging over your head. And so you can just get up, go to war, and makes things a lot easier. So, all right. I think that's pretty solid for a first stream here. I really appreciate you guys coming out, tuning in. If you like this, please let me know, and we'll hopefully do some more of these. Maybe this is what I'll move to in my stuff. So, feel free in like to shoot me like content on probably X is the best way to do it. Mark Weppet on X, and you can shoot me stuff if you want to see me talk about it at some point or whatever. But thanks for being here, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this rugged stream, and yeah, ooh-yah. See you guys all in the next one.